For any level of adventure rider, whether you are a beginner or a seasoned rider, you cannot overlook having a comprehensive toolkit. I'm going to show you how I built this toolkit for my Aprilia 660 and how you can build your own by going through your bike and finding the right tools. Hey, how's it going? Welcome to my channel. So riding in the backcountry can be very exhilarating and exciting, but a minor breakdown could turn into a major headache. So that's why it's important to carry a comprehensive toolkit. And I have received a lot of questions about the toolkit that I carry on this bike for those of you wanting to build your similar toolkit to carry with you. So I'm going to go through my toolkit for this bike. I'm going to explain where each of these tools, the wrenches, the sockets, the hex heads, where they go so that you have an idea. But more importantly, if you have a different bike than mine, that you also know how to go through your bike to carry the tools you need and not the tools that are excessive. Now, one of the things that I see quite a few people do is they buy the toolkits, the tool rolls. They're very expensive, and my experience has been in looking through all of the tools put in those tool rolls, there's a lot of tools that you don't need for your bike that aren't going to fit, and there may be things that you need for your bike that aren't going to be in that toolkit. So what we'll do is we'll go through and show you the tools that you can use and only carry what is used on your bike. So let's get into the toolkit itself. If you have any questions as I go, leave that in the comments below. I'll answer it the best I can. And then I will put a comprehensive list, every tool that I have here. And then I will also show you or tell you where it goes on the bike so that you know how to use each of those tools and why it's important to carry each of them. All right, when building a toolkit, we need to be realistic with ourselves. We're not likely going to tear our bike down to the frame unless something goes really, really bad. But for just common maintenance, common minor things that may happen, you want to have the tools available. So in my experience, usually the areas where I have the most trouble is on add-on parts. Bolts vibrate loose. I have had to fix many a luggage rack because bolts have came out. I've even broken a few bolts just from the vibration. Maybe at that point in time, I was carrying a lot of weight. So I wanted to have the tools for that. So let's get into the toolkit I carry, and you can determine whether or not these are things that you want to carry. So to start with, I always carry a multi-tool. I love the Gerber multi-tool. I find this, the pliers to work really, really well. And with the extra little things that are in here, it works great if you're at camp and anything really quick. I find it to be very useful to have. Then the most likely of chances that you're going to need to do any repairs is probably going to be on your tires from flats, punctures, or pinched tubes. So I carry a set of Motion Pro bead breakers just in case I have to remove the tire or pull a tire, put a tube in. So I carry that with me because they work as a bead breaker and also as tire levers. And then on this bike, I had replaced the axle nut to be a 27 millimeter. So I carry this wrench as a 27 millimeter for the axle. And then it also works as a spoon. Now, in the hopefully unlikely event that I have to put a tube in my wheels, I carry a stem puller so that it's a little bit easier to get the stem from a tube through the wheel. Is some tires are really, really stiff. The carcasses are stiff. The bead is really stiff. It's hard to get your fingers up underneath there to get it to fit in. I found this works pretty well. Now, continuing on the tube theme, I also carry a small valve stem puller. So I can twist the valve stem out if I need to. Just, you know, you never know when you're going to need something like that. And then just in case if I am into tubes, or if I find that a tube that has been in my bag for a really long time, maybe from the vibration or something has a hole in it, I carry a patch kit just in case. Now, I think that I'm more likely to use this with somebody else, someone who's running tubes all the time, not on a tubeless setup. So I do carry a patch kit. And then the final thing that goes along with that is a puncture repair kit. If you're going to be running tubeless, you really need to carry a puncture repair kit. You know, I prefer the gummy string ones over any of the other types. I've tried the mushroom ones. I couldn't get those to hold air. I've tried the small ones with the little metal tip that you put in there. I couldn't get those to hold air either. I just find the gummy strips work the best. Starting with the tools that I carry a 3/8 inch ratchet. This one is probably a bit big and a little bit heavy. I could get a smaller one, but I've been carrying this for quite a while, and it's held up pretty well. What I found with less expensive ratchets, if you don't spend a lot of money with it, the ratcheting mechanism in here sometimes gets loose, and it can be really frustrating if you're continually having to keep the switch or hold the switch in one direction or the other because it has a tendency to get in the middle. This hasn't done that to me, so I keep that. Now, I do have some stuff that's 1/4 inch, so I carry an adapter 3/8 to 1/4 just in case I need to use one of these others. And then if it's in an awkward place to get to, I have this really old, tiny 1/4 inch breaker bar that gives me the ability to reach in some awkward angles to at least break bolts loose, and then I can find other ways to get in there and get them out. Now I realize I'm looking at my toolkit here and I'm actually missing a couple of things that would be useful, and that would be some extensions. I think a small 3/8 inch extension and a 1/4 inch extension could be useful to get into some areas of the engine or into the framework if you need to. I carry open end box end wrenches, so I'm going to go through each of those and where they are found and used. I've got my sheet here. So I carry an 8mm, and this is for case bolts. In case any of them come loose, I see a little oil weepage, I can use this to tighten those up. And then I have the 10mm. I actually have two of these. 10mm is for the adjuster on the chain slack, so that I can get in there and adjust that. So the reason I have two is I keep one in my tank bag, so if I need to make some quick adjustments, I can get to it really easy. Then I have a 12mm wrench. This can be used on the banjo brake disc lines. Hopefully I never have to get into those, but I do carry that just in case. And that was the only place I could find the 12mm being used on this bike, but I do have it with me if I find some bolts that I missed that are 12mm. And then 13mm. The 13mm is the locking nut on the chain adjuster, so I carry this as well. I tend to carry two of these so I can keep the 13 and a 10 in my tank bag so I can make chain adjustments without having to take out my whole toolkit. And I have a 14mm, which is the nuts on the rear sprocket. So if those come loose, or if something happens and I need to make any adjustments or do anything with those, I carry a 14. I think there's some other spots that a 14 is used. I couldn't find it when I was going through there, but I carry this. It's a bit overkill. The chances of having to do anything with the rear sprocket, if this is the only place it's used, pretty low, but I still carry it because I want to have a comprehensive toolkit. And then this is a very common size, so if you're with somebody else who needs a 14 on their bike, then you have it with you if their toolkit is not comprehensive enough. So 15mm, the one place that I found it was on the kickstand bolt. There's tends to be a few 15mm, especially if you're putting aftermarket parts on. I found quite a few of those nuts and bolts can be 15s as well, so I carry that. And then the really important one is 17. And the reason I say that this is an important one is 17mm is the nut and bolt size that holds my skid plate up in the back where the center stand would attach is where my skid plate attaches. So if I need to get in there for any particular reason, I have this, and inevitably I end up taking the skid plate off, I don't know, a couple times a year, depending on what I've got to do. If I have any maintenance, I take it into the shop. I always have this to take off just so I'm not getting charged extra labor hours. So if you find yourself having to take your bike into the shop, you can drop your skid plate off and things like that. So carry that with me. All right, let's talk sockets. I'll start with the smallest moving forward. I carry a 10mm socket, and the 10mm is, there's just a bunch of different bolts throughout the bike that the 10mm fits. I think it's pretty standard size, so nearly every toolkit should have a 10mm socket. And then I have a 12 millimeter socket that I carry with me. And this happens to be for the front bolts of the skid plate. So I carry that. And then I have a 13 here. And the 13 fits some of the suspension bolts. So if for some reason I need to take the shock out or check linkage or something really bad happens down there, break a shock, break a spring or something, I have this that I can get in there and pull apart the suspension linkage and get the shock out if necessary. Now that'd be pretty bad if that were to happen, but different things do happen. All right, 14 millimeter, I carry this for the sprockets. This particular socket fits on there. I can use a wrench as well, but 14 is a common size, and if you're with someone else, they may have a 14 millimeter on their bike, so I carry that. The 15 millimeter, it's basically the same as before. This also fits the suspension nuts. If I'm having to pull any of this suspension apart, I can get to it with that as well. And then the 17 that I used before with the wrench, I can get a socket on one side of my skid plate to get in there to get the skid plate bolts off. Now, while we're talking about not necessarily sockets, but something you can use a 3/8 inch driver on, that is the front wheel axle socket to get that pulled out. So I carry that. This is pretty heavy. This is a steel version. I think aluminum would be quite a bit lighter and maybe a little bit more useful, but I needed it, and this is what I ended up with. All right, onto the hex heads. There's quite a few hex heads on the bike that I have here to make sure I can do nearly everything I need to. Now, if you buy a hex head kit, you're gonna get a bunch of extra hex heads that I just didn't need, and you're probably not going to need them either. So make sure if you buy a kit that you actually check to make sure that you're not carrying extra hex heads you're not going to use. So let's go through that. I carry a 4 millimeter, pretty small. This works on a lot of the plastics to get those things off. And then I carry a 5 millimeter, and that just ends up being for the front axle pinch bolts and also for my hand guards. So if I have to do anything there, I've got that. I have a 6 millimeter. The 6 millimeter on my bike is the triple clamp pinch bolts. So if I need to adjust those, maybe I have a bad off and I've twisted the forks, I can loosen those and get those straightened out. The next is 8 millimeter. And I have this, my crash bars hidden behind this bag is 8 millimeter, and these are actually engine bolt mounts. So I carry this with me. If for some reason I need to get in there or something happens to the crash bar, I can loosen it or do whatever I need to do with the 8 millimeter. And then I also carry a 10 millimeter. Now, the only place I could find that the 10 millimeter would be used is on the stator cover. If for some reason I need to get in there, it's likely overkill to be carrying this, but I have it. Now, I do have one other small driver here, and this is a Torx. It's a 25. Some of the plastics on this bike uses Torx, and it just happens to be this smaller size. Now, depending on your bike, I've had BMWs and Yamahas. They also, you'll find places where they use Torx, so make sure you're carrying the right Torx if you need to get your plastics off. So for me, I only needed the 25. I also carry 3 Allen head or hex head small wrenches. This is a 4 just as a variety so I can get into places. So then I have this 5 millimeter I can use on the handguards just as an alternative. And then I also have the 6 millimeter, which is the fork pinch bolts. So between these 2 wrenches, the 5 and the 6, I can get into the forks and also pull the axle out if I need to pull the front wheel off for any particular reason. A couple of other tools that are a bit more universal, and that is a crescent wrench. I carry this. One of the nuts I can't get to on the skid plate with a socket, so I have the 17 millimeter open and box in, and I use this to get to it if I've got to do anything with the skid plate. So I do carry this, and then different places. The other thing that I tend to use this with and have used it is if I need to bend anything. It's rare that it happens, but Maybe you've bent some of your rack or something. You can use the jaws on this to get in there and start bending things back and forth. So I do carry that. It's probably a bit overkill, but I do have it in my toolkit. And then I also carry a pair of just snub nose pliers. They're not very expensive. About the only time I think I've used these is pulling nails out of tires when I've had a puncture, but I still carry them. I could use the multi-tool, but I like having more leverage from the longer handles on this and being able to grab a hold of things. So I do carry those. And you just never know when you may need something that you could use these pliers on. Working on wrapping up some of the other things I carry. I carry a little hand pump. I do have a compressor that I carry with me, a rechargeable compressor. But just in case something happens with that compressor, maybe the battery dies, or I've had quite a few of those over the years, you know, when they get to be 2, 3, 4 years old, the battery stop holding a charge, and if they hold a charge, they don't operate very long. So I carry a bike pump just in case. I also carry a bag full of bolts and a few nuts. This is overkill. I need to go through this because this is quite heavy. This is where some of the weight for my toolkit's coming from. I need probably 3 to 4 of each of the sizes in here, not more than that. More than that's going to be overkill. So I will be going through that, but I do recommend, what I do is whenever I put an accessory on my motorcycle, crash bars, and I take engine bolts off, or anything where I'm removing a bolt from the bike, I put it in the bag to have it in here as a spare in the event something happens. I can always replace it with one of these. Especially if you do add a lot of accessories, those tend to be the bolts that break and also come out. At least that's been my experience. So I want to have a backup for that. So this is heavy. There's a lot in here. There's things that I would probably never use. I've had to get creative when I've broken luggage rack bolts and they have just flat fallen out. And that was happening on my BMW with the rack I had on there. So consider carrying some extra bolts with you just in case. The final items I carry with me are some Gorilla Tape. And not this whole roll. I'll take, I don't know, several feet and roll it up, or put it on a tool, which I'm going to roll some up around this because I've used up the Gorilla Tape I had before. And then also zip ties. There's just so many different places I end up using zip ties. And there's times where I've broken luggage straps, and I've had to zip tie stuff back on. I've had to zip tie windscreens back on. So I think carrying a handful of these, maybe not necessarily the entire pack, but I don't know, 20 or so, that should get you by. And if you find that you need more, you can always find a hardware store somewhere, but having some zip ties is also quite important. So those are the final items that I have on here. A couple of miscellaneous tools that I'm really not even sure why I carry these is a Phillips screwdriver and a Flathead screwdriver. There's really not a lot of places I can use these. The Flathead, for as big as it is, the only place I can find to use this would be on the fork adjusters and also on the shock adjustment if I need to make any suspension adjustments. But I got everything tuned in pretty well, so it's really rare. And then as far as Phillips screwdrivers go, I don't think there is a single Phillips head on this bike. If there is, I can't think of it right now. I still carry these. I don't know why, but I do. I think it's just the expectation is you always have a screwdriver with you. And then I also carry this little Pedro's multi-tool. I keep this in my tank bag, which also has a Phillips and Flathead, and then a couple of hex heads. So if I just need to do an adjustment really quick, or want to take my windscreen off really quick, I can just use this instead of having to dig out my entire toolkit. So just a couple of small miscellaneous items that I carry with me. And I carry this in my tank bag. I carry my multi-tool in my tank bag and a couple of wrenches like I had mentioned before. There's my toolkit. I covered everything that I carry. There are 2 things that some of you may have picked up that I'm missing. One of those is JB Weld. I had JB Weld tubes over time. They got punctured, they dried out. So I need to replace that. I haven't done that yet. And then also, I like the steel sticks. Those work pretty well. But again, that thing got crumbled up, mashed up, and eventually hardened in my bag. It was very old, so I need a new one of those as well. So those are things that I need to add along with the extensions that I talked about before. So if you have items that you carry in your tool bag that I've missed, please let me know in the comments, or things that you think I should also be carrying. Or if you think there are things that I shouldn't be carrying and it's just a waste of extra weight, let me know that as well. I'm always trying to refine what I carry, make it better, try to figure out how to do this the best I possibly can I know my toolkit is quite big. It's a bit on the heavier side, but I want to make sure I have what I need, especially when I'm doing solo adventures. So if you made it to the end, I really appreciate it. Remember, you can always make more money, but you cannot make more time. So get out on your bike and do that ride you've been thinking about. Thanks for watching. Get out, do some riding, ride safe, and I will see you out there. Test, 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 test.